I'm a karaoke DJ. I usually get home between 2 and 3 a.m., but tonight I got off around 11 because the bar had a power outage. I live alone in a triplex behind a house. I live in the middle of a city, but the property I'm on is rather large, so there's a big backyard behind my apartment. As I was coming home tonight, I noticed that my cats weren't waiting for me in the window. They can always hear my van pulling in the driveway. They're in the window every night, no exception. I thought that was odd. Then I noticed that my kitchen light was on. I never leave my kitchen light on. At this point, I'm a little freaked out. That's when I thought I saw movement in my kitchen. I dialed 911 and the dispatcher told me to lock my van doors and remain in the vehicle and stay on the line. Officers show up very quickly, less than 5 minutes. They parked on the street and walked up to my van, asked me to stay quiet and give them my house key. One officer went to the back of my apartment and the other used my key to unlock the door. When he opened the door, all was quiet. Then he yelled really loud, telling someone to come out. I heard the police officer that was in my backyard start yelling at the other officer, and he ran out to join him. My neighbors had come outside at this point, and I was freaking out. It seemed like a long time, but they then walked a cuffed woman toward me, and it turns out it was a patron that I 86'd the last weekend. I don't know how she found out where I live. She was hiding in my bedroom closet with a very large knife and a bundle of rope. I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I had gone to bed with her waiting for me in that closet. I was driving home from a big city near my little town late at night. It was after a day date with this guy. It was our first date. It was sometime in March of 2012. My date was asleep and his seat was reclined really low. We got into town around 1 a.m. and I noticed this guy standing on the corner that I was about to stop at, and it was a red light. He looked like he was probably on something. He was talking to himself and pacing. This made me a little nervous, but whatever. I'm a little too quick to judge people sometimes, so I give him the benefit of the doubt. So I stop, and we accidentally make eye contact. At least I accidentally make eye contact. I could tell he was yelling at me because I kept hearing, "Bitch," and some other things as I was stopped at the longest red light ever, as the guy I was with was sleeping cozily in the passenger seat, really reclined, so the guy at the corner couldn't even see him. After about 10 seconds of the guy cussing at me, he hopped over to my car and swings the passenger door open, reaching for me. I started screaming bloody murder, and the guy I was on the date with finally woke up and started smacking the guy. The guy's yelling, "Fuck, man, I didn't see you, fuck." He kept calling me names and screaming that he didn't see him. My date pushed him out the door, and I zoom off, running the red light, of course. He closed my door and yelled, "Who the fuck was that?" Meanwhile, I'm hyperventilating, and then I start half laughing, half crying because my nerves at this point were completely shot. We got ice cream at 1 o'clock in the morning. I took him home, and then I went home myself. We laughed about it, but I really don't like to think about what would have happened if he hadn't been in the car with me. About 3 years ago, I moved to London. I was looking for a flatmate but had no luck, so I turned to my friend Marcus. After a week or two, Marcus and I had moved in together. After I had moved in, he put some of his stuff in the storage so he could make room for me in his flat. When I moved in, everything was fine and well. Fast forward about a year. I went to get some stuff out of the storage locker that Marcus put his stuff in. And as I opened the door, an absolutely rank scent hit me like a bat. I switched the light on and saw a couple of old boxes and a couch. I was looking for the source of the smell, but I couldn't find it. I grabbed what I came for and left before I threw up. Now fast forward to about a month ago. I went back to the storage unit to get something else, and the smell was even worse than before. I had to hold my nose as I walked into the storage unit. That's when I saw an open box, and I decided to look into it. I found stuffed animals, but not regular stuffed animals like dead animals that were stuffed. As I looked into that box, I decided to look under that one. That's where I found rotting animals. I was completely disgusted, so I went to Marcus to confront him. As I walked into the flat, I shouted, "Marcus, you sick fuck. Why are there dead animals in our storage locker?" He came out of his room and sat me down on the couch. He told me that he wanted to be completely honest with me. And that's when he told me that he was into necrophilia. Cut to me moving in with my parents. My dad was out for a job interview, so me and my sister had the place to ourselves for about 2 hours. I watched TV downstairs and went outside and went back in. I left the door unlocked for my dad since it was getting close to the time he said he'd be home. I went upstairs and hung out with my sister for a while. I heard the front door open and rummaging through cabinets, and I just assumed it was my dad since he always likes to check that everything is in its place before he relaxes. I also heard my dad's door open and close, albeit slowly, a few times. I was talking with my sister when the phone rang. To my surprise, it was my dad on the other end. He told me that he was going to be getting home late and that we needed to make our own dinners. And that's when I felt my heart fall into my ass. I realized that wasn't my dad that entered our house. I rushed downstairs to see if everything was okay. Several things were gone, and the front door was wide open. I then heard what sounded like breathing coming from the downstairs bathroom. I choked the urge to yell as I saw a hand wrap around the door and a face peer around my corner. As soon as the guy saw me, he ran like hell out of there. I chased after him, but he was long gone. On the floor in the bathroom, I found later, of all things, a box cutter knife. I'm not sure what his intentions were with the weapon, but I'm sure they weren't good. My wife had gone shopping for the day, and so I was in the basement doing some woodworking. I heard her car pull in, so I headed up the stairs to help her with stuff. She ran into the house, saying that someone was after her. I got pissed. People tend not to mess with me. Here's an important factor. I'm 6'1" and 260 pounds. Used to be a power lifter, work at a sawmill. In my wife's words, I'm somewhere between a bear and a mountain man. We also have a Great Pyrenees who happened to have been inside with me at the time. If you're not familiar with the Pyrenees, they're great dogs. They're a guard dog breed, originally from France, and ours is 140 pounds. They're the sweetest dogs, great with kids, unless you threaten their people. For example, we have coyotes here. We also have a 16-pound Mott, my wife's dog. One day, 2 coyotes attacked the little dog in the yard and the Pyrenees killed them both. Now back to the story. I'm pissed. So the dude busted up in my house assuming she was alone since my truck was in the shop. He wasn't expecting me or the Pyrenees. The big dog charged him, all 140 pounds of him, grabbed the intruder by the arm and dragged him to the ground. I grabbed him by the throat and told my wife to call the police. I got to spend about 15 minutes threatening to kill the man if he moved, and the Pyrenees never let go of his arm. Cops show up, took my statement and hers, and the bad guy went to prison. It seems this fool had followed my wife from the store, which was 30 minutes away. He had made passes at her, but she knew if she could just get home, she'd be safe. This happened 10 years ago. I was living in my first apartment, alone. It was a 3rd-floor studio with vaulted ceilings and an enormous complex that promoted itself as community, with socials planned and picnic playground areas among the buildings. The staff would even drive around on golf carts waving hi. It felt like a safe place. One day I called up maintenance because my AC wasn't working. A man comes to look at it. He's short, kind of wiry looking, maybe late 40s, leathery, like he spent most of his life in the sun. He's in overalls, has a bushy mustache, all smiles. He's inside my apartment with the screwdriver looking at the AC, and we're making chit-chat. All seems fine and dandy until he stands up, says it's fixed, and takes a step toward me. He's looking me in the eyes while he flips his screwdriver, suddenly not so friendly anymore. Then he says, and I'll never forget this, "You know what I think? I think you're pretty naive to be living in an apartment all by yourself. Here you've let a strange man into your apartment. You even let me close the door. Anything could happen." I could feel the smile melting off my face, but I tried not to let on that I was afraid. Then I laughed and said, "Ha, that's what my boyfriend said when I told him I was calling you guys. He insisted he come over. He'll be here any second, and you guys have already finished. You'll probably run into him on the stairwell." At that he left abruptly, and I locked the deadbolt after him. I, of course, had lied about my boyfriend coming over, but immediately called him to make it almost the truth. At the time, I thought I was overreacting. I didn't mention it to anyone. Looking back now, I realize just how sinister that was. In the 1980s, my family went to the SEC basketball tournament in Birmingham, Alabama. Because of so many fans showing up for the game, all of the good hotels and decent motels were sold out. So my family had to stay at a very seedy-looking travel lodge. The door wasn't secure, the phone was two-tone black and white, the TV had one channel, and you could barely tell that Three's Company was even on. I had to pee, so I went to the bathroom and noticed that the toilet top wasn't there. By toilet top, I don't mean the seat. I mean the lid over the water tank in the back. I didn't think much about it since the rest of the room was so jacked up. My dad was out trying to find tickets to the basketball games, and I decided to take a nap. After a while, there was a knock on the door. I guess the door didn't have a peephole because my sister asked, "Who's there?" And the reply was, room service?" I guess either my sister or mom opened the door, and then I heard them slam the door and go hysterical, screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." The knock on the door had already half woken me up, but their shouting woke me up for real. When I asked them what was going on, they said that there was a scruffy-looking guy holding the lid to the toilet that had been missing, using it upside down as a tray, and on it was a dildo, anal beads, and 2 packaged condoms sitting on it. The dildo was white or off-white, and my mom and sister said it didn't necessarily look unwashed, but it had brownish stains on most of the shaft. That's when they pushed chairs up against the door until my dad got back, and then we changed motels. Of course. Early 70s, DuPlain, Illinois. Back then it was not uncommon to hitchhike. My dad and my uncle enjoyed doing this, as they were quite adventurous. They were both pretty young, early teens. They had just gone fishing when they made their way to a nearby coffee shop in search of a ride to get closer to home. A middle-aged man stopped to pick them up. There was nothing really striking about the guy. He just looked like a typical guy. So they got into the car with him. My dad sat in the passenger seat, while my uncle sat in the middle of the back seat. Everything was fine, until the driver reached his arm toward the back of the car and put his hand on my uncle's knee. My dad's creepometer sounded right away, and as soon as they came to a stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm, and they got the hell out of there. Fast forward a few years to 1978, and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspaper. It's the man who had picked them up a few years back. The article states that this man was arrested after police found 33 teenaged males buried in various parts of his home, including the crawl space. This sick man would find teenaged boys wherever he could to rape, torture, and kill. And his name was John Wayne Gacy. When I was 6 and my brother was 10, we came to notice that we always had a cop car following us around. This went on for a couple of months during the summer. We didn't know what was going on until later when we moved far away. That's when my mother explained to us that for 2 or 3 months, some weirdo would call the house when my dad was not home and tell her how he would rape and kill us. Now, people may ask, but why would the cops take this so seriously? Number 1, the man would be aware when my mom was alone with us. Number 2, he would tell her what we were wearing and what we were doing on that particular day. Number 3, he knew our names. 4, he would call from random phone booths around the city where we lived, sometimes from really far away. He took the time to drive to other ends of the city to make the phone calls. 5, the Montreal boy slasher was active at the time. After we moved, it stopped, and nothing ever happened. Still makes my mom go fucking mental because she says the first time he called, he was just so polite and had a very pleasant tone in his voice. I was around 16 or 17 when this happened. I used to work in a grocery store in what most would consider a bad neighborhood. I always worked till around 11 p.m. and head across a fairly busy street to get to the bus stop. The bus stop isn't the most well lit, and the buses have been known to pass people because they couldn't see them sitting there. So I'm waiting for the bus to pull up when this white minivan pulls up in front of me. The driver rolls down his window and asks how old I am. I just look at him because why would I tell you my age, random person? He begins telling me that I should get in the van to go with him to church. I can see another person sitting in the back of the dark van, but I can tell he's looking at me. The driver then begins to insist that I get into the van so he can save my soul. Right when he starts to open the door and I start easing back to run, the bus pulls up behind him, blowing its horn at him. He slams his palm on the steering wheel and speeds off as I'm running to jump on the bus. I tell the driver what happened, and he drops me off right in front of my house and waited until I got inside. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 16. I was at my best friend's apartment. It was around midnight and both of us were in the kitchen dancing around and being silly in shorts and bikini tops. Her mom was passed out on the sofa at the other end of the apartment. Bearing in mind she lives on the ground floor. After a few minutes, we noticed an old car slowly driving past the window. We thought nothing of it really, until we saw it come back and stop right outside. We thought maybe it was one of the neighbors, but it was a bit odd as they were all quite old and probably wouldn't be driving around this time of night. We just continued with what we were doing when her door buzzer went off. My best friend, without thinking, pressed the button to open the main door, not even asking who it was. When she opened the door to a tall, large, bald man dressed in old paint-splattered clothes, who walks up to the door and says to us, "You ordered a male escort?" He says this. Me and my best friend look at each other with confusion, and I say, No one ordered anyone. You have the wrong house." He kept edging his way closer into our doorway and said again, "No, you definitely told me this address." We got freaked out and asked him to leave, but he proceeded to tell us he was coming in and made his way into the doorway. Just as he did this, my friend's mother comes to the door and asks him who he is. He backs right up from the door and starts stuttering, saying he got called to this address. She asked him what this address was, and he didn't have a clue. Just made up some street while he kept stuttering, trying to think of somewhere. He apologizes, and then leaves. Me and my best friend are pretty shaken up, but decide it's a good idea not to prance around late at night, not wearing a lot of clothing. I went to middle school and high school with a tall, skinny guy, who I had occasional interactions with, but I always got a weird vibe from. In my senior year, I saw a Facebook post he made that said, "I bet I could get more kills than the Virginia Tech guy if I wanted to, but I don't want to." Despite him saying he didn't want to, I found this concerning enough to report it. Fast forward a few months later and he was out of JJC, and to make a long story short, he had found out that I had reported him. We had apparently made peace after smoking weed with mutual friends, and it was enough for me to not expect getting jumped in the hallway at any time. We both ended up going to a local college, and I would see him around campus. Whenever he spotted me, we'd have these brief, awkward conversations about how life was going, and I would try my best to stay polite while not sounding creeped out. One day I'm at McDonald's with my roommate when I hear someone whisper in my ear, "I'm gonna kill you someday." I turn around to see him smile and wave at me before walking away. I haven't seen him since then, but I always stay alert for the next random moment where I'll encounter him. I used to live in a very isolated rural town with a population of approximately 120 people. And as expected, I knew everyone there. My best friend and I were typical benign teenage delinquents, and our favorite game at the time was this activity we referred to as Dead Fred. We would stuff a full-length wetsuit with newspaper, dress it out in long sleeves and jeans, and leave it lying in the middle of our street at night. Meanwhile, we'd be hiding in the bushes, laughing and musing on the varied reactions of those who came across the scene. One night, a car seemingly didn't notice Dead Fred and drove right over the top of him at full speed. The driver screeched to a stop 50 meters away and got out of the car. I recognized him. It was a close friend's dad, a recently retired accountant who I knew well and had been my rugby coach for the last few seasons. He looked unstable, possibly shaken but likely drunk. Drunk driving is common in small country towns like this. Without much hesitation, he pulled a rifle from the boot of his car. Again, another thing common about living in a small town. And that's when he fired several shots at the pretend corpse from afar and drove away. My friend and I kept this to ourselves, and as far as I know, we are the only two who know. The driver remained a close family friend, continued to coach me in rugby, and has since had grandchildren. I still see him when I go home for holidays, and as far as I know, he's never fessed up to the incident and carried on with his life for the next 23 years, and into the present day, as if nothing ever happened. When I was around 6 or 7, I used to take swimming lessons in a local pool after finishing school twice a week, on Wednesday and Fridays. On Fridays, my mom would take me into McDonald's to get a milkshake as a treat afterwards. I'd sit and drink my shake, then we'd head home, no problems. This day was different. I'd finished my shake and wanted to use the toilet before we left, so I went into the ladies on my own as I usually did. I noticed one cubicle was locked, but I thought nothing of it, and went into the other, did my thing, flushed, and noticed that the person in the other cubicle was unlocking their door too. I hadn't heard them flush. I turned around and it was a man. Old, disgusting, and tall. Why was he there? I innocently say, "This is for ladies only, mister." And he said, "Why do you think I'm in here, little girl? It's music to my ears. Where's your mommy?" That's when he took a few strands of my hair and twirled them between his grim fingers and reached a hand to grab me by the shoulder. I shook out of his grip and ran as fast as I could to my mother, crying. I told her what happened. She told an attendant, but by the time they checked, he'd managed to slip out unnoticed into the busy street. I live in a semi-sketchy town in the Pacific Northwest. About 2 blocks from where I live, there's a bridge over the ocean with a little beach, where a lot of crimes take place. Bodies, rapes, etc. So I got off the bus that takes me to this bridge. It's the closest bus stop to my apartment. 3 teenage boys cross the street toward where I am. So I cross the street away from them, trying to get to my building. They cross back. I thought that was weird, but whatever. I start taking this narrow path up the beach toward another street. They're following me. I pick up the pace and glance over my shoulder. I'm a 21-year-old woman and these guys look maybe 16, but I'm also 5'4" and pretty skinny, so I'm doing that thing that a lot of women do when they think perhaps they're being followed and weigh the odds of fighting them. This path I'm taking is fucking desolate, and there's no one around. But there's still some light out and I was glancing over my shoulder. They're filling the gap between us. I couldn't be totally sure they were following me until I heard one boy say, "Stay at least 3 yards behind her or she'll notice." When I turn the corner out of sight, I sprint behind a hedge and wait for them to head out, hoping they think they lost me. I text my boyfriend that I'm being followed. He agrees to leave work early to meet me where I am, just in case. They turn the corner just then and I realize the middle one, the tallest and possibly oldest, has a fucking knife on him. And I hear one of them say something like, "She's probably on the street over there." And then they leave. My boyfriend meets me soon after. And I am so fucking thankful they didn't figure out that I lived right there. Hi guys, I hope you liked the video. I want to thank you for listening, and before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Howard Roletter, Jacob Clancy, Jen Parsons, Laura Labs, Psych CU, and the Schmeister. Starting this month, I am doing a monthly giveaway just for my patrons on Patreon. So for every $1 they contribute, that's how many times their names are entered into the giveaway. So if you contribute $1, that's 1 entry, $10 is 10 entries, etc. Also, if you are a patron, you get ad-free downloadable content that you'll never hear on the channel. So you might want to consider becoming a patron. At some point, I hope to add more features on Patreon, but I think this is a good start. Thank you for coming and watching and liking the videos because that helps support the channel too. Otherwise, I'd just be making these things for myself, and that would just be stupid. See you next time.